All right, welcome back, everyone, to the Mafia Scum Modern Super League we're running. We just had another match, and now we have one coming up between DeathNote and the Status Quo, who goes by Shea. And to cast this match will be Cow and Pseudo. Let me throw it over to them.
Hello, everyone. As mentioned, we have DeathNote against Shea here. Let's take a look at the decks, starting with DeathNote's. Pseudo, what can you tell me about this deck?
All right, so this is blue-black mill, and so it basically does exactly what it says on the package. It plays blue, it plays black, it tries to mill your deck into your graveyard so that you lose when you try to draw a card and you have nothing. So you see archive traps, you see, the mind funerals, the visions of beyond, all of which either put cards into graveyards or take advantage of the fact that there are cards in graveyards. And snaring bridge to try to prevent the attacks. Basically, it's very straightforward. Just ignore your opponent's life total, mill their graveyard, have fun from there.
All right, and it is pretty straightforward. So let's switch it over to a much less straightforward deck in Shea's deck. What can you tell me about this one, Pseudo?
Well, first, I'm going to tell you that I have post-traumatic stress disorder from this deck. But the second thing I'm going to tell you is that this is a 4-colored gifts deck. So basically, it plays a ton of one-ofs and then 4 gifts ungiven. The idea being you grab a bunch of cards just from drawing them naturally. You use gifts ungiven to try to get packages together. So you play gifts ungiven, you pick 4 cards, your opponent puts 2 of them in your graveyard, the other 2 in your hand. Ideally, you get gift stacks that either work well with each other so that it doesn't matter what gets put into the graveyard, or gift stacks that work with what goes into with what you have already got in your hand, so that your opponent doesn't really know what they should give you. And then you just try to roll with whatever win condition you happen to be able to assemble.
And in some cases, you want to just gifts for 2 cards and put them directly in the graveyard, right?
Yeah, you see like Elish Norn, Unburial Rites, because the card your opponent has to select 2 cards, and you're not required to take up to 4 because you're allowed to fail to find cards with specific attributes under Magic rules. You can pick just 2. Your opponent has to pick them. They both go to your graveyard. And if it's something like the Elish Norn Unburial Rites package, that means that they're forced to put those both in your graveyards. You flash back on Burial Rites, you get your Elish Norn, or whatever, or your Torrential Gear Hurl, or your Sun Titan, depending on what it is you're going for. You've also got plenty of cards like Emrakul that take advantage of having just a bunch of cards in your graveyard. Emrakul and Traverse the Ulvenwald. So you can easily just fill your graveyard. Filling his graveyard is something that his opponent is going to do for him. Fortunately, because of the nature of gift stacks, Shea is set up to take advantage of his graveyard. So that'll kind of be a mixed blessing.
Yeah, there's a little bit of interesting interaction between what the 2 decks want to do. How do you think the matchup overall is going to go with that in mind?
Well, for starters, I think it's going to go long. For seconds, I think what we're going to see is DeathNote is going to try to mill as much of Shea's graveyard as he can. Shea is going to try to take advantage of what's in his graveyard and what's in his hand, because he's got a lot of cards that can use his graveyard as a resource. So he's going to try to take advantage of that. He's going to play his game. DeathNote's deck doesn't really do anything with the board. It doesn't really interact in any real way, besides trying to get down this ensnaring bridge to block attacks. So, I mean, we're basically going to see them just kind of play past each other, and whichever deck does its thing better. It's basically 2 decks goldfishing, kind of.
Kind of, although I think some of it will depend on what exactly gets milled in Shea's graveyard.
Right. Obviously, Shea's running so many disparate packages that it's entirely possible that he'll just lose his ability to recover things. Like if he doesn't draw his gifts ungiven, if they all get milled, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. If his cards that he needs to take advantage of, cards that are in the graveyard, gets milled, he's going to be in trouble. He's got a lot of redundancy, so I wouldn't expect that exactly, but it can happen, especially since he's getting milled for large chunks at a time, and he's kind of doing some self-milling as well.
Yep. We also have to keep in mind fetch lands versus fetchable lands, which in a deck with so many singletons like this can be a real concern.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, Shea shouldn't have much trouble getting his colors because he's got so many things that can recover. He's got his life from the loams. He's got a variety of fetch lands. But when his opponent is, flipping things into his graveyard, it's entirely possible he's going to flip, all of his forests or something, and he's just not going to be able to get an overgrown tomb when he needs it, for example.
Indeed. So do you have any other thoughts on the matchup, or can we go down and take a look at opening hands?
I think you can take a look at opening hands at the moment.
All right, Shea won the die roll for this game, so let's take a look at his hand first. We have 3 lands, Fetch Land and Heath, Watery Grave, and Breeding Pool, and then Executioner's Capsule, Engineered Explosives, Abrupt Decay, and Thopter Foundry. Thopter Foundry, of course, being a part of one of his combos with Thopter Sword, with Sword of the Meek.
Right. Thopter Foundry, he's glad to have in his hand. He doesn't care if the other half, the Sword of the Meek, gets milled because it comes back from the graveyard anyway. So basically, he needs Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek either in his hand or milled, and then any one other artifact, for example, Engineered Explosives or Executioner's Capsule that he's already got in hand. And then he's free to just pump out a ton of Thopters.
Yeah, I like this hand. It seems to have enough action for the right pieces of interaction that DeathNote might have, and he's got half of one of his combos to start with. And if it goes into his graveyard, that's great, and that's exactly what DeathNote's trying to do.
Right. He's got no gifts ungiven, but DeathNote might make that irrelevant. He's got the only real caveat is that the Thopters obviously rely on attacking, and in DeathNote can maybe get down an ensnaring bridge, but I mean, he's got the Engineered Explosives, he's got the Abrupt Decay, so it's not like that's going to slow him down for very long if he gets it.
Yep. So switching over to DeathNote's hand, we have 3 lands, Shelldock Isle, Ghost Quarter, Watery Grave, 2 Ensnaring Bridges, and 2 Manic Scribes. Manic Scribes get the mill started, although very slowly, and the Ensnaring Bridges can hopefully stop Shea's attacks. Thoughts on this hand?
It's very slow is the problem. Manic Scribes, as you say, they mill slowly. And if you're going to mill at a kind of a slow pace, that benefits Shea, I think, more than it benefits DeathNote. He's got his lands, which I think is fine. The Ensnaring Bridges, having redundancy is good because Shea may have a little bit of trouble clearing them both, although we see he does have 2 answers in hand. So I guess depending on how well he draws into his colors for Engineered Explosives. The big problem with the Ensnaring Bridges is just going to be trying to empty his hand so that they actually do anything.
Yep, it's a tough hand. Might be keepable, might not be keepable, depending on what DeathNote thinks of the matchup.
Right. I'd be tempted to ship it, but, I mean, you saw what happened when I played against Shea's deck, so take your pills, I guess.
Indeed. Shea mulligans to 3 lands, Traverse, Expedition Map, Coiling Oracle.
I thought his first hand was very keepable, so I'm surprised to see a mull here, but I'm guessing he's just trying to get into more action and try to get to his gifts ungivens.
He probably wants a quick clock against the mill deck as well.
I'm guessing. And this will give him a Coiling Oracle to play if he can find his colors. The Expedition Map can find him, and the Marsh Flats will help him filter for the colors he needs, so that shouldn't be too huge a problem. But this is a deck that, or a hand, sorry, that doesn't really seem to do a whole lot.
Nope, it seems like he's keeping the 6. DeathNote was keeping his 7 as slow as it is, so we're going to start, and Shea plays his Marsh Flats.
Yep. Looks like Shea went ahead and kept on top, so we'll see that in a minute.
So do you expect a Traverse for a blue source so he can play Coiling Oracle next turn, or just a land Expedition Map here?
Personally, if it were me, I'd try to get down this Coiling Oracle fast because it's basically your only pressure. But, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Expedition Map because a 20-turn clock is not all that impressive.
Although the Coiling Oracle does draw him another card. And he may want to keep the Traverse for once his opponent gives him delirium.
Right. I think both are viable plays here. I would lean towards the map, probably, not thinking about it, but I think either is defendable.
He does go with the Traverse. Can only get a basic land here, so we'll probably see the snow-covered island.
Yeah, I would be surprised if he didn't get a blue source for this Oracle if this is his line.
And there is the island. DeathNote draws an archive trap, which will be handy at some point, but is, funnily enough, a little late here.
Well, it's not as though Shea can go forever without searching his deck.
Right, he just has so many search effects.
And we'll see the Shelldock Isle into something.
Looks like he's Shelldock Isling a Visions of Beyond.
Yep, not the most inspiring get, but what are you going to do?
His other options were Crypt Incursion, Flooded Strand, so Visions is probably still the best choice here.
Yeah, and I think with the Shelldock Isle, it's mostly that he's happy not to have to draw any of those other cards.
Yes. Shea draws an Executioner's Capsule, which isn't going to do a whole lot here. Plays the Coiling Oracle.
As expected.
Shea fishing for Pact of Negation here. Seems pretty unlikely.
Well, deck lists are public, so screw it.
Yes.
There's a Noxious Revival, which is probably going to be big game in this deck, since he's going to have plenty of opportunities to grab a bunch.
Yeah, that's going to be very valuable for him when a card is milled that he really wants to have in his hand.
And he's got a 1/1 down, so DeathNote's on the clock.
DeathNote draws Hedron Crab.
Which is going to be a lot more inspiring as far as mill goes compared to these Manic Scribes.
Yes. Much faster mill than the Manic Scribes because he can play Hedron Crab, play a land, start the milling off. Plays the Watery Grave tapped to trigger the mill. Mills Overgrown Tomb, Elesh Norn, and Engineered Explosives.
The Elesh Norn is interesting because that's a card Shea wants in his graveyard, so he can Unburial Rights it later.
Yeah, he has to find the Unburial Rights, but if he does, that's going to be a very valuable thing to have in there. Draws a Sylvan Caryatid, which is just a 0/3 mana creature. gives a little bit of acceleration. He plays the Swamp.
I wouldn't be surprised to see him just use this Executioner's Capsule on the Hedron Crab just to stop the mill.
He does not have a second black source right now. So
No, but he can
can't do
play it
that
out
right
over
away.
2 turns.
Yes. So he can play Capsule, Caryatid, and then Capsule the Crab next turn to slow down the mill clock. An attack with the Coiling Oracle.
He's also a horrendous jerk, so you see him put his lands out in front of his creatures.
Yes, after initially starting with lands in back. But next comes the Caryatid to just continue ramping up his mana, as expected.
Yeah, basically a very straightforward line.
Over to DeathNote, who draws another Manic Scribe.
Scribes for days. This Ghost Quarter can actually take Shea off a color if he wants. I mean, I don't know how valuable that is with the Sylvan Caryatid down, but it's not.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that valuable with the Caryatid, especially because there is a forest and a plains in Shea's deck that he can just search for off of the garden.
It does make an interesting line, though, because he can use the Ghost Quarter to prompt the Shea to search, and then that'll turn on his Archive Trap.
That will make for a nice chunk of mill at once. But we'll see probably just Ensnaring Bridge here to try to handle all the huge threats that Shea has at some point. Even if he's only got a 1/1 and a 0/3 defender at the moment.
Right, and it's the Ensnaring Bridge doesn't really do anything with DeathNote's hand at 5 cards,
Correct.
But I mean, for the future, spend the mana now. Note that Shea also milled a Raven's Crime off that Hedron Crab landfall trigger, which is another card that doesn't really hurt him by being in the graveyard.
No, he can start stripping cards out of DeathNote's hand with the Raven's Crime to just keep him from casting his scary mill cards.
And we'll also see Shea Noxious Revival back his Traverse the Ulvenwald.
What do you expect to see him do with that?
It's hard to say at the moment because there's basically Shea's deck is crazy enough that he can get a bunch of anything, really.
And he has land, creature, artifact, sorcery, instant in the graveyard, so his Delirium is on and he can go get whatever he wants.
Right. I think Snapcaster is probably the best guess, but it is basically just a guess because he's got so much. He might just want another land for all I know.
Is there anything in Shea's deck that can take care of the Ensnaring Bridge, perhaps?
Nothing creature-wise, I don't think.
The closest is probably Eternal Witness to get back the Engineered Explosives and play that out on 3.
Right, but if he wanted the Engineered Explosive, he could have just revivaled that.
Yes.
So yeah, this is Shea's deck is a whole lot of 1-ofs and a whole lot of tutoring for the given 1-ofs because wacky toolbox adventures are fun.
Yes, there goes the Capsule on Hedron Crab to slow down the mill and allow his Coiling Oracle to get in there for a big point of damage.
Hey, you gotta get the damage in at some point.
Yep. He plays out the Tectonic Edge. In comes the Oracle.
Gotta let your opponent know that you're there. Make him respect that coiling oracle. Just 19 more swings to go.
Indeed. A slow clock, but a clock it will be if he keeps the ground clear. Looks like he's leaving up 2 mana for that expedition map.
Yeah, I'm guessing that he just wanted the traverse back, but he doesn't know yet what it is that he wants to traverse for, so he's just going to hold on to it.
Right, he can find whatever land he wants with the expedition map to continue ramping to try to find a big threat, or perhaps hope that his Unburial Rights gets milled.
Right, or he can expedition map for his Academy Ruins and Academy Ruins back his expedition map and just cycle that way if he wants to. There's a lot of things he can do.
Right, we've got Ghost Quarter targeting Temple Garden here, and Shea's going to crack the map in response.
Right, as expected.
This should prompt an archive trap from DeathNote at some point during the turn here. So Shea's going to just shortcut here and find his lands at the same time. One will be a basic for the Ghost Quarter, and one will be whatever he wants for the Expedition map. And the second one there goes into his hand.
Yeah, that shouldn't be any problem at all. But like you mentioned, this is going to prompt an archive trap and then probably a Manic Scribe. If he does archive trap, that takes him to 3 types in his graveyard, so he's still not activated with Delirium, but he's close.
So it looks like Godless Shrine to hand and Forest to play here.
Yeah, I imagine he just wants to leave that green up so that he can traverse the Ulvenwald without using his Caryatid.
And there's the archive trap right on time. A lot of things being milled here.
Yeah, you see the Emrakul, but it's the wrong one for a mill deck.
Unfortunately, he's not going to shuffle his library back into his graveyard. There's the Unburial Rights. So he's got Unburial Rights plus any large threat he wants if he can find a way to take care of the Ensnaring Bridge.
Right, he's got his choice of Sun Titan or Emrakul or Elish Norn at the moment, although all of them run into trouble with Ensnaring Bridge.
Do any of them help take care of the Ensnaring Bridge?
In theory, Sun Titan would, if he had his Seal of Primordium in the graveyard, but it doesn't appear that he does.
Well, his Seal of Primordium is a sideboard card, so it's not going to be there this game.
Yeah, but it's still not in his graveyard, though, either way.
Very true.
Elish Norn might actually be counterproductive just because if he pumping all the creatures can be bad with Ensnaring Bridge down if he doesn't find an answer.
So he finds an Eternal Witness, and if he Unburial Rights his Sun Titan for that, he can get back whatever he wants. Does that help him at all?
Well, he can Unburial Rights is like you mentioned. He can Unburial Rights on Eternal Witness back his Engineered Explosives, and then Engineered Explosives for 3, and then that'll take this Ensnaring Bridge off the board. But it will still give him trouble against the second Ensnaring Bridge.
Right, but can he play around the second Ensnaring Bridge, or does he just have to do what he can to try to get the first one off the board?
Well, I don't think you can play around the second Ensnaring Bridge. I think you have to play around the first one. Fortunately, that line is not all that bad against a second ensnaring bridge because the attack with the Sun Titan. If he Eternal gets the engineered explosives back for 3, blows it up, that'll blow up the Eternal Witness as well, and then the attack with the Sun Titan will allow him to get back the Eternal Witness and then the engineered explosives again for the second ensnaring bridge. So in theory, he's still got a line even against the second ensnaring bridge, but I don't know that he's planning for it.
Yeah, he does seem to have a loop of blowing up his own Eternal Witness to get it back and just keep getting back whatever he needs to if he's playing his explosives on 3.
Right. It's just another one of those neat synergies that you get when you're playing so many toolbox cards and can fetch them out consistently.
All right, we see a Traverse here. For Torrential Gear Hulk. What does that let him do?
Huh. That's not a line I had foreseen, but let's take a look at his graveyard.
Plays out a Godless Shrine.
I suppose that he can torrential for Bring to Light. That doesn't do anything. He can torrential for Gifts Ungiven and search for stuff.
Torrential for Gifts Ungiven seems pretty likely, actually.
That does sound like the best line. I don't think he wants to consume the Meek here.
Probably not, although that does let him blow up any creature that DeathNote might play, such as another Hedron Crab here or a Manic Scribe.
Yeah, Consume the Meek and Fatal Push will basically kill any creature in DeathNote's deck, but DeathNote's deck doesn't really care about its creatures all that much.
It does clear the board for any large creatures that Shea may play, though.
It does, but I think Shea is more concerned about the ensnaring bridge when it comes to large creatures than he is about, a Manic Scribe.
All right, we have a Hedron Crab drawn for DeathNote here. It looks like he's just thinking about whether to play out Crab, Scribe, or possibly a second ensnaring bridge, or the Visions of Beyond.
I don't think you want to bother with the ensnaring bridge, just because Shea's answers will generally wipe out all of them. Stuff like the engineered explosives. I think he just wants to play out his creatures.
Right. Just clog up the board a little more, have more milling threats.
And try to get his hand as empty as possible for the ensnaring bridge.
Right, back over to Shea, who didn't cast the Unburial Rites last turn, although he had the mana for it. Looks like he wanted to save it for end of DeathNote's next turn. Gear Hulk back a Gifts, probably.
I think that's probably going to be the play, because he's not playing out his Unburial Rites, which, Unburial Rites Elish Norn gets rid of the Hedron Crab, but not these Manic Scribes, so I guess you can charge in. But then his Coiling Oracle can't actually attack. So my guess is that he's going to Torrential Gear Hulk for Gifts Ungiven, gifts back what he can, and then maybe Unburial Rites into Eternal Witness into Engineered Explosives on his next turn, would be my guess.
Seems reasonable. DeathNote plays Visions of Beyond here to draw 3 cards.
Yeah. Worth noting that it's actually a replacement effect, so he can't choose to draw 1. I don't know why he would want to, but he couldn't do that.
Draws land, Phantasm. The land will, unfortunately for him, come in tapped.
It still activates Hedron Crab, though.
It does activate Hedron Crab.
And these Phantasms will be 5/5s, which is a little bit of a non-bow with the ensnaring bridges.
Right. He probably just is going to want to keep them around to be large blockers for any flyers that Shea might use. Even though I don't think there are any in his deck, they're still very good blockers for any big threats if Shea can get rid of the ensnaring bridges.
Right. I think the line here is that you play out the Dark Slick Shores and then play out the Manic Scribe, but he might play out one of these Jesus Phantasms just as a blocker, as you mentioned.
Nope, just a Manic Scribe. Continue the mill plan. Another Gifts, a Swamp, and a Sphinx's Revelation, which is not really a combination against mill, especially with Torrential Gearhulk, since you can't add X's to it.
Right. I don't think he is going to want this Sphinx's Revelation either. And he is down to 16 cards in deck. So we'll see how he chooses to play it.
Yeah, he needs to find an answer pretty quickly here. But he's going to Gearhulk. He's going to Gearhulk Noxious Revival to get what he wants on top of his deck. And he wants the Emrakul.
And he's going to have all of the Delirium to cast that. So
Yes. The only problem with Emrakul is there's not that many ways to ruin DeathNote's turn with one.
right, he can play the Emrakul. DeathNote doesn't really have much in his hand that he can cast that would really hurt him. But I mean, I guess he can eat a couple of these Manic Scribes if he really wants to.
That seems like the most likely play. Possibly the Manic Scribes, possibly the Crab.
Right. I'm surprised he didn't actually play out this Dark Slick Shores to activate the Crab with, to be honest with you.
The one possibility is he doesn't want to allow his Shelldock Isle to be Tectonic Edged.
That's possible, but the Shelldock Isle is just holding a Visions of Beyond, and I don't know that how much he cares about that. But yeah, I guess if you're really scared of your mana, then Tectonic Edging or protecting from Tectonic Edge is fine. It's not as though the Dark Slick Shores does much to help him.
Right. Now, we probably see Shea cast the Emrakul here and just do what he can to ruin DeathNote's turn. What sort of shenanigans can Shea get up to when he takes DeathNote's turn based on what's on the table here?
Based on what's on the table, not a whole lot. I mean, all of his creatures have 0 power, but they don't have defenders, so they can attack and he can eat them. But Manic Scribe specifically, I mean, Delirium is inactive, but even if it did, it only hits opponents. He can Hedron Crab, he can play out the Dark Slick Shores, make DeathNote Hedron Crab himself, but I don't know how badly that really hurts him. He can, I guess, play out this Ensnaring Bridge so that he can get both of them should he ever bring back his engineered explosives. But there's not really a whole lot that he can do that would really hurt him.
Well, and it looks like Shea miscounted and doesn't actually have the mana available to cast the Emrakul.
Yeah, I had assumed that he had everything in his graveyard.
So artifact, creature, land, sorcery, instant.
Doesn't look like he has an
-5.
enchantment in his graveyard yet.
Yeah, -5 still gets you to costing 8.
Yeah, and he's only got 7 mana.
Well, he only has 6 right now because the Evolving Wilds doesn't count.
All right, the Evolving Wilds isn't tapped for mana unless he gets his Ulamog. So I guess, yeah, he's only at 6. Wow. I had assumed he had all his creature type or all of his card types in the graveyard from all that milling that had happened, but he hasn't hit an enchantment yet, and he hasn't hit a Planeswalker. I don't think he even plays Planeswalkers, so I don't expect him to ever hit one.
A Watery Grave for DeathNote here.
Something he could do here is that he could Watery Grave to get the Hedron Crab trigger, then Ghost Quarter himself to get another Hedron Crab trigger, and then that would get him 6 cards in the graveyard and get him out of Tectonic Edge range. I don't know how valuable a play that is, but it's something.
He's going to just use the Isle to play his visions.
Still only at 3 card types in the graveyard, so no Delirium for these Manic Scribes, which would be big game if he could turn it on.
Right. That would speed up the clock a lot. We see him draw Glimpse the Unthinkable, Archive Trap, and Mesmeric Orb here.
Right. He can't actually cast Glimpse the Unthinkable at the minute, and Mesmeric Orb doesn't actually do anything because Shea doesn't have anything tapped.
Right. Looks like he's going to Ghost Quarter himself, targeting Shelldock Isle to probably get a land here so he can play Watery Grave and Glimpse.
Right. If he gets himself, well, he can't get water. He can get himself like an island or a swamp. That'll give him a Hedron Crab trigger. Watery Grave will give him a second Hedron Crab trigger, and then it'll allow him to cast his Glimpse the Unthinkable. So that'll mill 16 cards.
And that should do it.
And it'll even turn on these Manic Scribes if by some miracle Shea can put a card back in his graveyard to avoid dying on his next turn.
Oh, I mean, he can just play the Darkslick Shore now that he's gotten back to 2 lands, so doesn't even have to play the Watery Grave.
Right. He can do that. It's basically academic at this point, though. And I think we'll see the mill deck take this one, as Shea was just not capable of finding any of his packages or any of his gifts ungiven in time to put something together.
Yeah, he didn't have the right answers nor a quick enough clock to take that before he just got milled out. So, going over to the sideboard, what do you think DeathNote's going to bring in here?
Let's take a look. So, against Shea's deck, Extirpate and Leyline of the Void are both big game because Shea's deck is so reliant on being able to take advantage of his graveyard. We saw a bunch of cards in his yard that could have been helpful if he'd found a way to actually use them. He had his Noxious Revival get some value that game. Sun Titan, in theory, could have gotten some value. Emrakul might have gotten value if he'd been a little luckier on his card types and his mana draw. So being able to take away his graveyard is going to be valuable. I don't think Profane Memento and Set Adrift really do anything in this matchup, so I wouldn't expect to see either of those come in.
How useful are the Extirpates against a deck with that many Singleton cards?
Normally, I would say not at all because you're only getting one card out. But because Shea's deck relies so much on getting its silver bullet packages, being able to extirpate in response to an Unburial Rites or a Snapcaster Mage or a Noxious Revival, because you're not actually required to cast the card until after they've picked a target. So you can get a lot of value out of it just by taking away their attempts to put together a package.
And you can always take away a gift if you mill one early, and then he has to rely on drawing a lot of the specific cards he wants.
Yeah, if he can extirpate a gifts, that would be a big game because that's gonna take away his major ability to put together any of his packages. He can take away a lot of like the one-ofs when Shea tries to get value off of them by flashing them back or by trying to recur them. There's a lot you can do with extirpate in this matchup that you normally wouldn't expect against a deck that's mostly singletons.
All right, how about Shea's sideboard? What do you see coming in here?
Seal of Primordium is almost certainly coming in, Nature's Claim, just because, as we saw there, the Torrential Gear Hulks, the Sun Titans, the Emrakuls, and all that, their value mostly relies on being able to attack, which he was not able to do because he couldn't get those bridges off the board. They also work very well against the Mesmeric Orbs, which didn't actually do anything in that matchup, but in theory, very much could. Negate and Dispel could be very good just because they can take out some of these bill spells, being able to counter an archive trap, although you usually spring that early when your opponent doesn't really have the mana because they're searching for lands, but still being able to protect yourself from like a mill 13 could be very useful in this matchup. Being able to Thoughtseize away, Thoughtseize, Duress, Inquisition could also be very good because being able to take those cards out of your opponent's hand is of at least marginal value, especially over a lot of these removal spells that don't do anything, like Blessed Alliance.
What are your thoughts on the Surgical Extraction?
I don't know that it really does much or does enough because it's not as though DeathNote cares about his graveyard all that much.
The only thing I was thinking about with the Surgical Extraction is if you take care of an Ensnaring Bridge, you can then get rid of all of the rest of them.
And that's true, but I think Shea was going to be much better served overall if by trying to just get his Engineered Explosives, trying to recur his Seal of Primordiums and the like, rather than trying to get tricky with Surgical Extractions.
Fair enough. So players are starting to sideboard. It looks like DeathNote has taken out his Crypt Incursions and 2 Phantasms for the Ley Lines and 1 Extirpate. So he thinks Extirpate has some value, but only really cares about the Ley Lines here.
Yeah, I think he would have brought in more Extirpates, but I think he mostly wants to try to keep his mill package together as much as he can because it is very good against Shea's deck in a way that it's not good against or hasn't been good against like the faster decks in the format.
Right. If he hits a turn 1 Ley Line, much of Shea's deck is turned off unless he finds a way to take care of the Ley Lines.
Right, and Shea does have answers to Ley Lines, but a lot of them are going to rely on actually drawing the cards that he needs, like the Maelstrom Pulses, the Seal of Primordiums, and the like. And because his deck is mostly one-ofs and DeathNote has so much mill, it's entirely possible that those cards just get ley-lined away before Shea can actually find them.
Right. It does seem very easy in a deck with this many singletons to just take care of your opponent's answers as the mill deck here, and then your Ensnaring Bridges are going to stick, your mill spells are going to hit, and then your advantage just grows further and further.
Right. Usually I would say that mill decks are at a disadvantage usually because milling away a spell that your opponent is like just not drawing it in the first place. So it's like normally you wouldn't mind if your opponent mills away, your Seal of Primordium because you've got more in the deck and having it milled is the same as not drawing it. But because Shea's deck specifically is a bunch of singletons, once his Seal of Primordium is milled away with a Void down, it's just gone, and there's no like trying to draw it. There's no trying to recur it, and so Shea's just kind of out of luck if he loses that luck of the draw.
All right, it looks like Shea's sideboarding has finished. Looks like he brought in Seal of Primordium, Thoughtseize, Duress, Inquisition, Negate, and Dispel, taking out Engineered Explosives, Maelstrom, Pulse, Damnation.
Yeah, so he's taking away most of his mass removal, I think, because he doesn't really like the damnation, because he doesn't really care about Death Note's creatures all that much, and he's bringing in, like I mentioned, uh, the answers to Ensnaring Bridge, the Seal of Primordium specifically stands for Ensnaring Bridge, and he's bringing in all of his discard and counter to try to strip the efficient mill cards out of Death Note's hand before he can really use them for anything.
Right. So, he also took out the Blessed Alliance to consume the Meek, the Path to Exile. So it just looks like he doesn't care at all about his removal.
Yeah, like Blessed Alliance does actual nothing against Death Note's deck, so that's not a surprise to take out. And Damnation, I mean, it kills a bunch of Manic Scribes, but I feel like if that's your concern, you've got bigger problems.
Right. So let's go back down and see the players' opening hands. Starting with Shea, who is on the play, we see one land in Misty Rainforest, plus Snapcaster, Sakura Tribe Elder, Raven's Crime, Traverse, Gifts, and Seal of Doom. Thoughts on this hand?
Outside of the fact that it's a one lander, I actually kind of like it. He's got some early action. He's got the Seal of Dooms that can answer something. Gifts Ungiven, which is a card he really wanted last game and didn't get. Snapcaster Mage can find stuff. The real problem with this is that it's a one land hand, but I can easily see him like choosing to keep it, traversing the Ulvenwald for a second land, and being able to Sakura for a third land, and then just going to town from there. It's going to require a little bit of hope that Death Note doesn't lock him out early, but other than that, I think it looks okay. It just is going to depend on how much Shea feels like playing a one land hand.
Yeah, it's tough, but you sort of have to keep it.
Yeah, he's got plenty of ways to get out of the mana screw, so I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him play it.
Right. And over to Death Note, he's got 2 lands in Watery Grave Swamp, as well as Glimpse, Visions, Manic Scribe, Archive Trap. How do you feel about this hand?
This is another slow hand. He's got the Archive Trap that Shea can't help but set off. Glimpse the Unthinkable, which is castable right away, so he's got the ability to mill 23 right off. Manic Scribe, if you throw that in, he can mill 26 just with this hand, and then that'll turn these Visions on. He doesn't have an Ensnaring Bridge, he doesn't have a Mesmeric Orb, he doesn't have a Hedron Crab, all of which would help speed up his mill clock. But because Shea's hand, or starting 7, if he keeps it, is going to be dedicated mostly to getting him out of the one land mana screw, I mean, this could just be fast enough.
Yeah, it's a lot of mill, and it lets him draw into more cards with the Visions here, and they're both going to keep, which makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shea's going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball here, trying to keep up with what Death Note can do, but I don't know that his hand is returnable at all.
Right. So we see the Misty going to probably just get a green land here. Looks like he's going to shock for something, play Traverse, and then it looks like he's going to just get Archive Trap turn 1 here.
Yeah, I mean, the Archive Trap is always a problem, because if his opponent has it, and there's nothing he can do about that.
Sakura Tribe Elder, not actually a land here.
No, but wouldn't it be great if it was?
It's sort of a land.
Right, he's actually going to get the Breeding Pool, which makes sense. He's probably going to Breeding Pool, Traverse, probably for a black land, and then he'll be able to cast his whole hand.
There's the Traverse.
So now Archive Trap is double activated.
Yes. And that should be his turn, and we're going to see an Archive Trap here.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Archive Trap, then ship the turn, see Death Note probably do nothing, and then start playing out his glimpses and Manic Scribes on turn 2.
Yep.
I mean, in theory, he can Visions turn 1 if he really wants to, but I think he's probably going to save that for when the 20 or more clause is turned on.
All right. The cards that matter here that were milled are Unburial Rites, Sun Titan, Renegade Rallier, it looks like. A lot of lands. An Executioner's Capsule, a Duress, a Collective Brutality. That those don't matter as much. The Expedition map either. So we're just going to see a Watery Grave and a pass here.
Yeah, no surprise. He's just going to... All they could really do with that hand is Cycle of Visions, and he wants to save those.
Shea draws a Swamp, which is just... It's another land. He has to keep trying to find more lands here to get to his gifts. And there's the Sakura Tribe Elder, which will get him another land.
It'll also turn on Revolt for the Renegade Rallier if he wants to try to get tricky with that and the Sun Titan in his graveyard.
Yep. We see a Mesmeric Orb here, which is going to just be little bits of mill at a time that really add up.
And for which Shea has no answers.
He untaps Mills 2, which is Life from the Loam and Inquisition. He can...
He could have dredged Life from the Loam there if he really wanted to, but I don't know that he really cares for it at this point.
That just speeds up the clock a little bit, although it does draw more lands.
Well, we see some trickery with Life from the Loam, so who knows?
Right. Nope, he's just going to draw. He draws Thopter Foundry.
Thopter Foundry, but no artifact to activate it with.
Right, which is going to be tough. We can Raven's Crime once here. Or we're just going to see a Snapcaster Mage, it looks like. Probably for Duress here.
Right, although, I mean, Duress takes his Glimpse the Unthinkable, but I don't know that that's going to be super great to take away because he's got, these Manic Scribes, he's got this Mesmeric Orb down that he can't answer.
Right. And with 34 cards left in his library, the 10 was a big chunk, so that's going to help him out a lot. But the Scribes are going to block really well to keep him from losing too much more life here.
Right, and as expected, here's the Duress. He's going to take the Glimpse as expected, so that's going to stop the bleeding for 10, but he's still going to lose 3 cards to this Mesmeric Orb. He's going to lose 3 cards to this Manic Scribe, so he's still not in a great position here.
Right. Shea's going to just pass back, doesn't want to be tapping his creatures here for a minor attack like this. Well, maybe he thinks he should have.
Yeah, he could swing for one if he wanted to. But, I mean, that's going to cost him a fourth mill.
Right. There's a shell dock isle drawn here. Whatever that nabs is going to be turned on. It's going to be a little while still, but...
Right. So the Shelldock Isle was not actually his draw because he was supposed to mill twice before.
Ah, yes.
So now it's his actual draw step.
Which is Polluted Delta, another land.
A little bit of argument, but I think it all works out fine.
Yep, we see land, Oracle, Abrupt Decay get milled here. The Decay would have been a decent answer for a bridge if one shows up.
Also for this Mesmeric Orb.
Yes. So the Visions of Beyond is not quite turned on because Shea only has 19 cards in his graveyard at the moment, but as soon as he untaps here, it will be turned on to draw 3.
Right, and interesting play here is that he's got Delirium isn't turned on yet. He's only got 3 card types in his graveyard, but because he mills from Mesmeric Orb before the Manic Scribe trigger, if he flips like a second Mesmeric Orb or a Ensnaring Bridge or something off of it, then he's getting both. Then he's getting even more mill off this Manic Scribe. So it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, the self mill from Mesmeric Orb. Can help turn on the Manic Scribes. Just a little bit of confusion here as to what actually happened on that turn. Shea is going to sacrifice the Elder to find a basic land.
Although this will make him mill 4 because the land comes into play tapped off Elder.
Yes. But it'll make sure he has the mana for gifts.
Right. This will enable him to gifts. It will also enable him to Unburial Rights if he decides he wants to do that.
He can't actually get his planes for Unburial Rights, so he couldn't find the right mana for it.
The curses of a 4-color deck.
And he draws another gifts. What do you think you gifts for here? You need to find some sort of threat, right?
Yeah, I think he absolutely has to get a threat here. I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to get the Sword of the Meek to complete the Stopper Foundry package and just get a bunch of flyers that can tap over, although that kind of is counterproductive with the Mesmeric Orb down. I wouldn't be surprised to see him try to get like a Seal of Primordium or something that he can recur with the Sun Titan in his graveyard. He's got a lot of options, but he does need to get some sort of answer to this Mesmeric Orb.
Right.
I'll be right back.
All right. We see an attack with a Snapcaster Mage, likely a block here, since it's a 2-1 going into an 0-3. Yep, there's the block. So no damage gets through, and Shea just passes back. We may see a Vision's end of turn here, or he may just untap. So he mills Marsh Flats and Hedron Crab and draws a Mind Funeral, which is a big mill chunk, probably. There's a lot of lands in Shea's graveyard.
Yep. Mesmeric Orb causing all sorts of trigger confusion.
Yep. But we see a fetch for Island here off of the Polluted Delta, and probably the Mind Funeral here to try to get as much of Shea's deck gone as possible.
Note that he does have Delirium for these Manic Scribes now.
Creature instant sorcery land indeed. Here comes the Mind Funeral.
Just one of those cards that can be very devastating or do almost nothing depending on how lucky you feel.
Right. We see 2 gifts milled in the first 3 cards here. And there goes the Seal of Primordium. And there's 4 lands. 8 cards, which is probably slightly less than expected, but still a reasonable hit.
Right. And that does mean that he does have the option to Unburial Sun Titan get back the Seal Primordium, kill this Mesmeric Orb, on the condition that he can find white mana to do it with.
Right, which is going to be tough.
Right. I think this is another situation where Shea has just kind of got his back to the wall.
Here we see a Gear Hulk milled here. And Eternal Witness here is going to get back something. Possibly a land here to allow him to Unburial Rights.
Possibly, although I think at this point he's kind of slow.
He has 15 cards remaining in his library. Looks like we missed the Manic Scribe trigger here.
I mean, maybe I'm a little out of line pointing out the trigger, but I think
Yeah, you probably should not have pointed that out.
Well, I'm not quite sure what rule enforcement level we're at, so.
Well, regardless of the rules enforcement level, you still should not be reminding players about their triggers. It's a good thing for viewers to keep in mind here.
Maybe I just really hate Shea after that last match I played against him.
All right.
I guess I'll feel super bad if that changes the outcome of the match, though.
DeathNote mills 3, Manic Scribe, Mind Funeral Land, and draws a Ley Line. It's a little late.
Yeah, worth noting in this particular scenario that Leyline exiles cards that go into the graveyard, but it doesn't exile cards that are already in the graveyard. And we'll just see the second Manic Scribe here to mill another 3. And that'll result in a mill of 6 if DeathNote remembers his triggers.
Yep, Shea mills land, Noxious Revival, and scoops. He doesn't want to play anymore. Doesn't think he can win.
Well, he's milling 3 there. He's going to mill 6 off the Manic Scribes, assuming DeathNote remembers the triggers. He's milling at least 4 off the Mesmeric Orbs. So yeah, so he's going to be in kind of a problem situation no matter what he does.
Yeah, really tough matchup for him, as it turns out.
Yeah, he's just got so many singletons because he's trying to get different packages that are all silver bullets. So having them milled away where he can't actually take advantage of them, and also having his opponent mill him when his own deck is trying to mill itself so that he can use his graveyard is just kind of really counterproductive in this matchup.
Right. He's doing so much stuff with his graveyard that even though it's good to have cards in his graveyard, he still needs to find the right pieces to go together. And there's not enough time to do that against Mill, and you can't find your right answers, you can't find the right threats in time, and then you just die to having no library.
Right. I think this is one of the big changes from what we've seen in previous matchups where DeathNote's deck, because it's mill, it doesn't really interact with the board. It has trouble with a lot of matchups that would just run it over because it can't mill fast enough. But Shea's deck is very slow. It's trying to dig through its deck slowly. It's trying to find all its pieces so that it can get one of its combos down. And that basically just plays directly into DeathNote's game plan.
Right. Any other thoughts on the matchup before we call it for today?
No, I think this was just how it was always going to play out. Shea just could not go fast enough, and that was always going to be the determining factor in this.
Right. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Gonna send it over to Sens Fan to do an outro for us.
All right. Thank you, casters. Thank you, players, and thank you, viewers, for watching this match. I believe that wraps up our matches for today. We had 2 matches today in the Mafia Scum Modern Super League. Should hopefully have some more matches for you on Wednesday, so stay tuned for that, hopefully. But I believe this wraps us up for today, as I said. So for everyone here, thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.